Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome to today's webinar, which has as its topic one of the issues which is really at the heart of social protection systems, the question of how to finance social protection. My name is Shahra Razavi, and I'm the director of the Social Protection Department at the International Labour Organization, and very happy and honored to be moderating the panel today. I should say that this is the fourth session of our six-part webinar series for 2026. The series of webinars that we have is entitled Building Social Protection Floors for All, Key Achievements and Future Priorities of the ILO's flagship program. Now, to kick us off, I want to start on a positive note to remind us the good news that both in last year's, in 2025, Financing for Development conference and in the World Social Summit that took place, the outcome documents showed a very strong commitment to financing social protection. This was quite unprecedented, particularly for the Financing for Development conferences, if we compare it to the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. The Compromiso de Sevilla, which is the outcome document of the Financing for Development conference that took place in 2025, we have very clear outlining of a bold agenda to strengthen the global financial architecture so that it could better support the sustainable development more broadly, but including also social protection systems. Crucially, in this document, it's very clearly positioned social protection as being central to inclusive development, and it urges countries to increase the effective coverage of social protection systems by at least 2 percentage points per year, in line with ILO standards. And it calls for predictable financing of social protection, especially in times of crisis, and including, it specifies, within IMF-supported programs. So quite strong language here. I would also, in this context, since we do have our distinguished panelists from Spain, Brazil, and Zambia who are here with us, I want to really extend special thanks to them for their leadership and for their commitment, which was actually instrumental in securing this very important, crucial outcome document with the specific references to social protection as well. However, and here is, the not so great news, we know that we have a lot of challenges ahead of us as we're moving forward, and 2026 has started with a difficult moment, as we know, with the geopolitical crisis in the Middle East and its ramifications for different markets, energy markets, fertilizer markets, food markets, and prices and cost of living, which will likely have very important knock-on effects on the demands for social protection systems to be stepping in and ensuring income security and effective coverage. But our statistics, even before this crisis started, already shows that 3.8 billion people are still unprotected entirely for routine life cycle risks, whether when they get sick or when they lose their job or source of income. They have absolutely nothing to fall back on. Based on the current trends, it's very clear that SDG target 1.3 on universal social protection is seriously off track. So this really underlines the importance and urgency of turning the promises that have been made in the Compromiso de Sevilla into effective action. And this is really, I think, the topic that we hope that we can address today through this panel. Now, my colleague Valerie Schmitt, who's the Deputy Director of our department, will tell you more about this webinar series and the ILO Global Flagship Program. But before doing that, let me give you, before turning the floor to Valerie, I'm just going to say a few housekeeping rules to make it clear for us about what is available to you. First of all, the good thing is that you do have simultaneous interpretation in English, Portuguese, and Spanish. To access it, you have to click on the button which is interpretation and select the language that you would like to see. If you don't find the interpretation button, there's one that has 3 dots. And if you click on that, you should get to interpretation, and then you can select your language. We also have, I'm very happy to say, a Q&A segment, and therefore, before we do that, you can already start putting some questions into the Q&A box, and we will try and pick up some of those questions during the Q&A segment that I will have. So with that, let me now turn to Valerie to hear from her. Valerie, you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shahra. Thank you so much. So dear representatives of governments, workers, employers, organizations, dear colleagues, and dear participants. So a warm welcome from me as well to all of you. As Shahra mentioned, today's webinar focuses on improving financing for universal social protection. So it is part of a webinar series, as Shahra already mentioned, on building social protection floors for all, key achievements and future priorities of the ILO's flagship program. So we already organized 3 sessions as part of the series, one on unemployment protection in January, followed by a session on statistics in February, and another session on social health protection in March. This webinar series aims to showcase the key achievements of the second phase of the flagship program from 2021 to 2025, highlight priority thematic areas and strategic approaches under the first phase of the flagship program, which started in 2026 and will end in 2030, facilitate knowledge sharing and peer learning, and increase the visibility of ongoing and future projects and initiatives. So the remaining 2 sessions in this series will focus on extending social protection to workers in the informal economy and social protection and investments. It is widely recognized that investing in social protection delivers social and economic benefits. It ensures income security, reduces poverty, strengthens resilience, supports productivity, and stabilizes demand. Yet, as Shahra mentioned already, the financing gap remains large. In low and middle income countries, financing a social protection floor requires an additional investment of 3.3% of GDP annually. In 2025, the 4th Financing for Development Conference and also the World Summit for Social Development reaffirmed that public finance is really the foundation for financing development and financing social protection. In addition, both fora and both outcome documents call for expanding social protection coverage by at least 2 percentage points annually, where it is not yet universal. This remains a major challenge, but initiatives such as the flagship program are helping to translate these commitments into concrete action. Let me give a few examples. In Senegal, through the flagship program, we have supported a number of studies that help to reallocate fuel subsidies and improve social protection benefits for 2.7 million people. In Côte d'Ivoire, 700,000 farmers gained access to health insurance through automatic affiliation and subsidies of their contributions. And in Uzbekistan, ILO supports pension reform with IMF, with the World Bank, and with the Asian Development Bank to ensure fiscal sustainability. So today we will hear additional examples of how countries are financing the extension of their social protection systems. As Shahra mentioned, in today's global context marked by shrinking ODA and rising uncertainty, technical assistance must act as a catalyst for mobilizing domestic public resources for social protection. Technical assistance should help countries identify coverage and financing gaps, design and implement reforms, strengthen institutions, mobilize public and private resources, both domestic and international, and reinforce the financial sustainability of social protection systems. So we are deeply grateful to all our development partners who support the flagship program and also the Global Accelerator on Decent Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transition, and really help us secure our technical assistance on social protection financing. Particularly, I would like to acknowledge the support from the European Union, from Germany, from Spain, from Belgium, France, Ireland, Korea, and the joint SDG fund, thanks to whom we have been able to support countries to invest more and also to invest better in their universal social protection systems. So thank you to all the speakers and participants for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing your insights. Thank you, and back to you, Shahra.
Great. Thanks very much, Valerie. Thank you. And I think that was a good kind of wake-up call again, particularly thanks for highlighting the difficult context for many countries with shrinking ODA as well, which of course is impacting the kind of technical support that some of the international agencies can also provide to countries. So it is overall a difficult context, but we really now, I'm very curious to turn to some of our government representatives, and I would like to start, and it is indeed my great honor to open the session on the government perspectives on financing challenges by giving the floor to Her Excellency Cristina Díaz, Ambassador on Special Mission for Development Financing for the government of Spain. Spain, of course, was our host in Sevilla and convened the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development. And there, together with the ILO, Spain was in the lead for implementing partner for the Sevilla Platform for Action, which aims to expand social protection coverage by at least 2 percentage points. So I'm turning to you, Ambassador, and would really like to hear your thoughts on the key lessons from Spain's experience itself domestically in expanding social protection coverage, but also to see what those lessons are for countries that have not yet sort of achieved the kind of broad coverage that you have, and how Spain is going to further support some of the countries in reaching this important target of the Compromiso de Sevilla. You have 6 minutes, Ambassador, and I turn over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. And thank you very much to the ILO for convening this very timely discussion. Let me start with a simple but important point. Expanding social protection is not only a social imperative, it is a strategic economic investment. As highlighted in the Sevilla Commitment, and as the ILO has consistently demonstrated, social protection reduces poverty and inequality, strengthens resilience, and generates economic and fiscal returns over time. Let me share 3 key lessons from Spain's experience in expanding social protection coverage. First, political commitment and rights-based approach are essential. In Spain, we see social protection not as a policy choice, but as a right and a cornerstone of our social contract. This principle has guided sustained investment even in times of economic difficulty, and it has helped build broad public support. A clear example is the minimum vital income, introduced 5 years ago to address poverty and inequality. Today, almost 3 million people have benefited from this scheme. Beyond income support, it has strengthened social inclusion by linking beneficiaries with employment and other services. Second, social protection must go hand in hand with inclusive labor market policies. Expanding coverage is not only about transfers, it is also about creating pathways to decent work. In Spain, reforms such as increasing the minimum wage by over 60% since 2018 and reducing labor market segmentation have helped lower inequality and reduce the risk of poverty, particularly for women and vulnerable groups. We have also invested in skills, formalization of employment, and inclusion of groups traditionally left behind, such as young people persons with disabilities, and long-term unemployed. This integrated approach ensures that social protection systems are both protective and enabling. And third, sustainable financing is key. Expanding coverage requires fiscal space, and this must be built through fair and progressive systems. Spain has worked to strengthen domestic resource mobilization and improve the efficiency and transparency of public spending. At the global level, this is precisely why we supported the outcomes of the Sevilla Commitment, which calls for increasing social protection coverage by at least 2 percentage points per year, and for ensuring predictable and sustainable financing, including in the context of IMF support programs. So let me now turn to the second part of the question, how Spain can support other countries in reaching this target. First, through international cooperation and financing. Social protection is a clear priority of Spanish cooperation, as reflected in our cooperation law and our master plan from 2024-2027. Spain is a strong supporter of the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection, to which we contributed 10 million euros and of the joint SDG fund, where we are the largest contributor with a commitment to reach 120 million euros. These instruments are essential to support countries in expanding coverage, especially in contexts with limited fiscal space. Second, by supporting global initiatives launched in Sevilla. Spain is actively engaged in the Sevilla Platform for Action, including the ILO-led initiative Financing Social Protection from Commitment to Action. This platform is designed precisely to help countries translate commitments into reality by sharing good practices, strengthening capacities, and supporting those countries committed to expanding coverage by at least 2 percentage points annually. Third, by promoting policy coherence at the global level. We believe that financing social protection cannot be addressed in isolation. It requires progress on tax cooperation, debt sustainability, and international financial architecture. Spain is working to advance these agendas because without addressing high borrowing costs, debt burdens, and illicit financial flows, many countries will simply not have the fiscal space needed. And finally, through partnerships and dialogue. Spain works closely with the ILO and other partners to support the transition from the informal to the formal economy, which is essential to expand contributory social protection systems. We also promote South-South and triangular cooperation to share experiences and solutions adapted to different national contexts. Let me conclude with one final reflection. Despite progress, we must be clear, we are not yet on track. As the ILO reminds us, nearly half of the world's population, around 3.8 billion people, still lack access to social protection. Closing this gap requires urgency, ambition, and sustained cooperation. For Spain, the message is clear. Sevilla does not end in Sevilla. It marks the beginning of a renewed collective effort to scale up financing, expanding coverage, and deliver on our shared commitments. You can count on Spain to remain a committed partner in this endeavor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I think that was a very uplifting statement. And I take note in particular of what you said about social protection being at the heart of the social contract in all countries, the importance of working on social protection in tandem with also many other economic and labor market policies. You mentioned the minimum wage legislation, labor protection, and the decent work agenda, and that these two things need to go hand in hand. And also, very importantly, your point about policy coherence at the global level. I hope we will hear more from some of the other speakers on this really important issue at a time when many developing countries are struggling with unsustainable debt burdens that are really eating out and taking that fiscal space that they need for investing in social protection systems their public services, and so forth. So thank you very much. And we do really count on Spain's continued commitment beyond Sevilla. So thank you, dear Ambassador. With that, I'm going to now turn to our second panelist. I want to give the floor to Débora Freire Cardoso, who is Secretary of Economic Policy of the Ministry of Finance of Brazil, another very important partner in this Financing for Development conference. So turning to you, Débora, Brazil has been at the forefront when it comes to policy efforts that really are needed for strategies to finance social protection. You are very much, as I said, at the forefront of this effort. And so as a question to you, and as a fiscal policy expert, someone who sits in the Ministry of Finance, what advice would you give to your counterparts in other ministries of finance, in other countries in the Global South, regarding how to create fiscal space for social protection, both for the contributory and for the non-contributory systems and benefits? So if you can give us maybe your top 3 recommendations in 6 minutes, that would be amazing. I turn over to you.
Thank you, Shahra. First, I would like to thank for this opportunity to share the experience of Brazil, but I will take advantage of the translation, and please, I will speak in Portuguese, ok? Primeiro, gostaria de agradecer a essa oportunidade, agradecer à Organização Internacional do Trabalho pelo convite, mais uma vez por me convidar a estar com vocês nesse importante debate, debate que é muito caro, não apenas para mim, pessoalmente, como policymaker, mas também para o governo brasileiro, já que o financiamento da proteção social, a expansão da proteção social e o seu financiamento é uma marca desse terceiro governo Lula, e no Ministério da Fazenda estivemos plenamente comprometidos com essa agenda nos últimos 3 anos, e agora iremos completar o nosso 4º ano perseguindo essa agenda do financiamento justo para a proteção social. E, mais uma vez, também agradeço a oportunidade de aprender com os demais países, assistir, ouvir a experiência dos demais países e aprender também o que tem sido feito ao redor do mundo. Bem, para contextualizar brevemente...
Sorry, if I could interrupt you for 1 minute. There seems to be a problem with the interpretation. The English is not coming through. So if you can just stop for 30 seconds, and I'm asking our hosts to make sure that...
Okay, Shahra, if you want, I can speak in English. If it's better, I can speak in English.
It should be working. Okay. They say it should be working now, so please continue in Portuguese.
Okay.
Então, to contextualize the 3 recommendations that I'm going to present, I will briefly comment some recent experiences in Brazil. Over the last few years, after the devastating effects of the pandemics and some setbacks of the previous administration, the 3rd administration of President Lula started an expansion of the social protection system. He resumed social protection, which was a landmark of his 2 first administrations. The results are already visible. Between 2023 and 2024, there has been an average increase above 6%, which is higher than which was observed in the 2 previous cycles of administration, even considering the extraordinary expenses of the pandemics. So this shows that we did a lot in terms of expansion of social protection. The main program of income transfer, the Bolsa Família, represented around 1.2% of the GDP in 2022 and 0.4% in the pre-pandemic period. In addition, areas such as social assistance, healthcare, and education have expanded their participation in the overall expenses, showing the priorities in expenses. There has been an increase of over 1 percentage point in social expenditures. Naturally, this expansion requires funding, so the creation of fiscal space. And directly answering your question, Shahra, the 3 recommendations I'm going to outline today are: first, prioritizing the mobilization of domestic revenues in the focus in progress, and correcting fiscal discrepancies, and third, institutionalize the process of reviewing of expenses. I am going to give now a 4th recommendation, if you allow me, which is to construct the political environment around social funding, which was important to Brazil over the last few years in our approved reforms. Well, the first recommendation has a central objective to expand the funding abilities. Brazil has gone through a broad reform and changed the fiscal model in an IVA model. It is a progressive system because it eliminates exemptions on luxury items previously included in the basic package, and it creates a global fiscal that we call cashbacks for low-income families registered in our single registry, so our family registry of vulnerable families. This reform is considered a vector for productivity, increasing to the increase of revenues in short and midterm. We also approved an important reform of individual tax return, which reduces the fiscal load on employees with workers, with exemption for those who receive 5,000 reais monthly and up to 7,500 reais. And we introduced a rate of 10% for high-income individuals. So we recomposed the fiscal load for individuals, and we eliminated the tax for low-income people and introducing the minimum tax for super rich people who really pay less taxes because of exemptions and deductions that they take advantage of, the richest. Although this reform is neutral in terms of income for the country, it enlarges the income available for the overall population, and it reduces the perception of fiscal injustice. And we also started taxing offshore companies, and this was done in 2023, expanding the tax basis and correcting fiscal evasion, which is a very common problem, and the symmetry between the capital and the working income. In Brazil, it's still a problem, but we were able to mitigate a little bit this problem. This measure for offshore taxing and investment funds had an important impact in the collection of funds. We are already reaping the fruits. And we reinforced the taxing in fintechs to reestablish the competitive neutrality of these sectors, which were not taxed before nor regulated, and also to face regulatory concerns, including part of these incomes being destined to social objectives. In the case of sport bets, the objective was to mitigate the negative impacts of this activity and distribute the distribution of taxes throughout society, obviously inside the regulation. The second recommendation that's centralized in correcting distortions, it's an important agenda in Brazil. And basically what we did was to approve measures to improve the control of fiscal benefits, control and use of tax benefits. And we advanced in political solutions, programs which were not efficient. So we adopted concrete measures to recompose the tax basis, such as the gradual elimination of special regimes. It was a benefit created during the pandemics to help the sector of events, which was maintained politically by Congress. We had a solution to end this program, and very importantly, we progressively tax the payroll. Brazil still has a policy that hinders social security, and we were able to find a political solution to tax the payroll of these sectors who were not being taxed. And as a consequence, we were able to ensure and improve even the financial sustainability of Social Security. We also advance in terms of transparency. We launched a very important tool to follow all the fiscal incentives received by all the companies according to the fiscal number of the company. Today in Brazil, it's public. The access of information is public about companies that are receiving fiscal benefits. We also have a linear reduction of 10% in tax incentives, and this is being regulated right now. But this governance is very important to create a landmark, an institutionalized landmark of reviewing fiscal benefits. And this cut is very important to mitigate the effect of a disorganized growth of fiscal benefits that happened over the last 10 years in Brazil. By the end of 2026, we want to increase direct taxes on the payroll on over 1% in relation to 2022. My third recommendation is related to the importance of reviewing of expenses. Brazil has a very rigid budget with mandatory expenses coming from the Constitution, but that brings the consequence of making the budget too rigid, and this makes growth more difficult. And so we have to reprogram the priorities of expenses in a context, social context in transformation. We change a few programs that were not effective, such as the fiscal impact. We have an important policy resumed since 2023 to valorize the minimum salary, but we were able to modulate this real valorization of the minimum salary according to our fiscal framework, because we have in Brazil expenses such as Social Security and other expenses linked to the minimum salary. So we have to maintain this real valorization and also to make it sustainable. So the limitation is really important. And also we adopted more rigorous measures to control and monitor the expenses to improve control of the budget and ensure that social protection gets to those who need it most. And our process of reviewing expenses is still underway, but we have to advance to allow the reprogramming in line of demands like the economy of care, especially before the climate emergency. Finally, I have a fourth recommendation, which is to build a political environment around the just funding. The expansion of social protection is not only a technical challenge, but especially political. In the Brazilian case, advancing in the equality agenda, ensuring that the groups having more income will contribute more was essential. This helps legitimize reforms and enable changes that otherwise would face more resistance. It's very important to say that our reform of income tax that had a lot of political resistance, this progressive reform was voted in the National Congress with unanimity. So the consensus, the political construction, the public debate around this political construction was really important for this victory. And a very important recommendation and for its funding. Therefore, my colleagues, obviously, it's not an easy task. Brazil has faced huge political and economic challenges. Brazil has faced a lot of challenges, but we believe that there is no other way. We will persevere because this is the only way to take prosperity to all in the challenging global context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Débora, for your excellent presentation and the impressive work that you have been doing. And I'm sure your ministry and other ministries have been at the forefront in terms of creating this fiscal space through the kind of progressive taxation measures that you mentioned, exemptions on luxury items, how to tax. And that really gets us to the difficult global context, offshore companies, and the fiscal evasion of offshore companies and how you have been able to do that. Plus, as you said, elimination of special regimes and so forth, progressivity of payroll taxes. There was a long list of measures. And I think the important point that you raised in the end on how to take such measures in a way that is also based on social dialogue and there is social consensus around it. And I would just like to add that it would be interesting, not now, but maybe later in the discussion, to hear about the impact of these very important measures that you have taken, not only to expand the fiscal space for social protection, but also its impact on inequality, which we know is a big challenge for many countries, including Brazil. So we're hoping that these measures have also reduced the levels of inequality in Brazil. Let me now turn to our third government speaker. I want to hand the floor to Mr. Willis Chipango, who's the Director of Budget in the Ministry of Finance of Zambia. A very interesting case again, given the fact that Zambia defaulted on Eurobond payments in 2020 in the midst of the COVID crisis. So it defaulted on its sovereign debt. And despite this, in the period between 2015 and 2022, Zambia displayed an annual increase in social protection coverage of about 2 percentage points per year. So very impressive. You cover, with at least one social protection benefit from what we can see, 30% of your population, compared to an average for sub-Saharan Africa, which is about 11%. This is quite a remarkable achievement. So what has been the main strategy used to safeguard the social protection expenditure in Zambia following the default on Eurobonds, when we know there's a lot of pressure from many international agencies to put in measures of austerity? So how were you able to protect your social expenditure? What worked to keep a steady growth in social protection coverage? It would be really great to hear from you, Mr. Chipango, and you also have 6 minutes. I have not been very good at monitoring time, but I will try to do so. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shahra, and thank you for inviting Zambia to be part of this experience and sharing our financing journey has been for social protection programs. I have a short presentation. I'm not sure if it's possible to upload it quickly. Okay, is it coming on? I hope that's not eating into my 6 minutes. Fernanda, is it possible to load my presentation? Okay, while that is happening, let me just quickly indicate that, okay, it's opening now, thank you. Let me just indicate that Zambia has got a myriad of social protection programs. And of course, some of these include social cash transfers and the food security pack. And you can go to the next slide. The public welfare assistance scheme, and recently the free education policy. But very quickly, maybe to the first one, social cash transfer is covering almost 1.5 million households in Zambia. And if you look at the Zambian household population, that's about 5 people per household. If you multiply that, that is almost 8 million people that are being covered, which is close to what you rightly mentioned, Shahra, of about 30% of the Zambian population. Zambian population is about 22 million. And the transfer value is around $50 to $60 per beneficiary. We also have food security pack, which is basically an agriculture support program which empowers vulnerable but viable farmers. And I mean, with things like fertilizers, seed, and other agricultural inputs, and this covering almost half a million households. And we've got many others that I've mentioned. But the big one I wanted to emphasize on this particular slide is the fourth item, which is the free education policy. This started around 2021 when the new government came into power, and this involves a 100% removal of school tuition, examination, and other school fees from early education to secondary education, and this is currently covering almost 6.5 million learners. And about 2 million learners of those have just joined this particular benefit in the last 5 years. So that's how helpful it's been. In the next slide, I thought I could just highlight maybe one or two. They are not everything. I can't go through everything. Maybe just the number 5 one, which is the school feeding program. So this is like a sister program that has been put onto the free education policy, where about 5 million pupils are being fed at school with meals, and about 85% of the districts in Zambia are being covered under this. And we've got about 8,500 schools out of the 10,000 public schools that we have in the country that are being covered under this. So it's quite successful and it is helping a lot. In addition to that, we've got other social protection programs that are looking at women and girls, especially under Jewel. I think we're having a lot of assistance in that area. And of course, others that we have on health. The next slide was just me trying to give you, next slide, please, just to give you a pictorial view of some of these programs. So the social cash transfer there, you can see someone getting money in cash, but I must mention that we have already moved from that. We are now giving this digitally, so through their phones. Of course, not everyone has been covered. There's about, I believe, 10 to 15% that are still receiving cash under social cash transfer, but most of them are receiving this digitally through their phones. And of course, I had to show something on school feeding programs, free education, and food security pack as well. Someone was joking that in Zambia, it may not be a good business to start a private school because there is a huge influx of pupils going to the free education schools, which are the public schools. The next slide was just now me trying to answer the question that you asked. How are we financing these particular programs? So very quickly, I'll try to go through it. And very similar to what Brazil mentioned. Domestic revenue mobilization, that is very key. We are able to increase that from about 19.2% to about 22% of GDP in about 5 years, from 2020 to 2025. And the target is that we need to hover around 23% of GDP. And some of the tax measures we've done are quite similar to what we heard from Brazil. But you also know that Zambia is a big mining country, and we had to restructure some of the mining taxes to see how we could get some value from there. We also had to restructure some of the tax incentives that that we had offered to a lot of companies in the country to ensure that we gain some money from there to ensure that we fund social protection programs. Of course, the so-called sin taxes, excise duties, and so forth have also had to be revised. And in addition to that, we've had a lot of support from various cooperating partners, the World Bank, World Food Program, ILO, UNICEF, and them all, the European Union, and a lot of them to help in this particular area. The third item I thought I should mention, since my 6 minutes are almost up, were that we also had to revamp the social insurance schemes, which are contributory in nature, and that has helped a lot. The fourth item, which is maybe the big item, is the restructuring or the realignment of public spending that we did, and to shift resources from inefficient expenditure to social protection. One of the biggest ones was the removal of the fuel subsidies. We had a huge fuel subsidy in this country where everyone that uses fuel was being subsidized, and we are spending almost $800 million per year on this fuel subsidy, and that had to be removed. It was a big political decision, but it had to be removed, and the proceeds of this has gone a big way in terms of helping to finance social protection programs. And of course, there is the aspect of digitizing, which I talked about, digitizing a lot of these social protection programs to ensure that electronic systems are replacing the manual ones. In one program alone, which is the Farmer Input Support Program, when we went the electronic way, we saved about 25% of the amount that we are spending in this particular program. On the next slide, it's just a picture of me trying to show you how the spending has grown in the last 10 years in Zambia on social protection programs. You can see that in the first 5 years, from 2015 to around 2019, 2020, the growth on social protection programs was around 17% per year. And after that, after we did all these reforms that I'm talking about, because these are mostly 2020 to 2021 reforms, you can see that the last 5 years, the growth in terms of expenditure on social protection is almost exponential in terms of what you see. If you look at what we've planned for 2026, which is not here yet, it is even higher than the figure that I'm showing in 2025, and we hope that we manage it. Unfortunately, there are a few problems that have come with the war in the Middle East that might give us a few more problems in terms of how we handle that. As I conclude, on the next slide, I wanted to just mention two things broadly, but in the first item, to simply mention that effective spending on social protection programs builds the resilience among the people in the country, and this helps a lot in terms of withstanding any economic shock that you may tend to have in an economy. In 2024, we had a drought in this country, which is like the worst drought we have, which we can remember of in living memory. But we had to embark on social protection programs to safeguard the population and to also ensure that we safeguard people from hunger. And I can indicate to everyone here that we did not get any reports of anyone dying of hunger because of this particular drought. And that we thought was mainly because of how we sort of safeguarded the expenditure and the implementation of social protection programs. And this was quite helpful. But many other things are the issues that you already know in terms of social protection programs, enhancing productivity, and many other things. Of course, there are myths that we hear that social protection programs sort of enhances laziness and all that. I've never seen a lazy beneficiary of social protection, but those are some of the things that we can talk about a little later. It also empowers vulnerable citizens and improves livelihoods and so forth, and also helps to grow good quality human capital. And the last item I should say as I close is something that I always like to say, because most of these social protection programs are funded through subsidies, and subsidies always get a bashing in almost every area you go. But I always like to say that the efficacy of a subsidy is in its effective targeting. So if you target it very well, you see that a subsidy in itself is not a bad thing. but how you target it. In this country, we had a fuel subsidy that I just mentioned about, and we are spending $800 million per year, and we did not see the impact of what that subsidy was doing in the economy. But having removed that and we targeted it properly on these social protection programs, we were able to see that there was impact on the population. And with that, I would like to thank you and hand back to Shahra. Thank you.
Thank you, Willis. That was great. And I think the data was very well appreciated. And what you said, quite impressive in terms of the tax to GDP ratio, increasing it, and also the way you protected your social protection expenditure. And I'm happy you raised also this issue around social protection, increasing the population's resilience to shocks. And you mentioned the droughts. And in the context of the climate crisis, this becomes increasingly important to ensure this kind of wide coverage of social protection systems, given the fact that we are facing very regular climate-related shocks in many countries. So thank you very much for that presentation. I'm going to now, without any further ado, turn over to my colleague Umberto Cattaneo, who's our public finance specialist in the department. And I just want to ask Umberto, because we've been hearing quite a lot of examples about how governments are expanding fiscal space for social protection. And maybe, Umberto, very briefly, in a few minutes, if you can just update us on what is in the ILO strategy on financing social protection. What are the sort of items on which we see progress, and what are the priorities as we move forward? And really, you have only 4 minutes and not more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shahra. Not an easy work to answer your question after the 3 distinguished specialists from our governments, but I will try. So following the adoption of the Compromiso de Sevilla, the ILO has developed the strategy on financing social protection to promote the expansion of fiscal space at the country level. The core element of the strategy is the Sevilla platform for action on unlocking social protection financing from pledge to practice. This is a joint effort of the ILO, USP 2030, but also of key partners such as Spain and Brazil and Mexico, Germany and Qatar. This initiative was launched by the ILO Director General in June 2025 in Seville. A key element of this strategy that we have just launched is the platform to track progress on endorsements and on those that comply with the target of 2 percentage points. My colleague Andrea will put the link to the platform in the chat. The platform is like a one-stop shop to know about the 2 percentage point targets. And let me say that this target is not aspirational, it is achievable. This was our mantra during the conference, and many countries that have supported us, they have really looked carefully at the data. Let me provide an example for you. Togo, which ratified the ILO Social Security Minimum Standard Convention, was able to increase its effective coverage from 23% in 2019 to 39% in 2022, having an annual average increase in social protection effective coverage of 5.2 percentage points per year, which is well above the 2% percentage points benchmark. How was this possible? Well, Togo invested heavily in benefits for children and household, and this was the main factor behind this increase. Recent ILO data that are presented in the platform show that 43 countries that represents half of the world population have already reached this pace of progress over the past decades. And this is very encouraging. However, there is a large part of countries that still needs to comply with the 2 percentage point target, and let's see how we can support it. One of the other results of the strategy was the completion of the second round of engagement with the International Monetary Fund on financing social protection. We worked in 9 countries. Let me just highlight a few examples. In Morocco, which ratified Convention 102 and as a condition the extension of pension coverage to self-employed workers, we work with the IMF to expand social protection and pension coverage to self-employed workers. While in Eswatini, we have worked with the IMF to provide joint technical assistance to set up an unemployment insurance fund. Well, what we can draw from this 4-year collaboration with the International Monetary Fund is that working with the IMF on social protection financing has brought our constituents together with ministries of finance, so ministries of labor together with ministries of finance, and also we were able to provide ad hoc country guidance that is now published online, both on ILO and IMF website, and is a basis for providing further technical assistance to other countries that are interested. Another forthcoming part of this strategy is the Handbook on Fiscal Space for Social Protection, which brings together practical evidence on how to expand fiscal space for social protection. We have a part on domestic resource mobilization, which is crucial. We have heard it from our countries, but also we will have a part on how to manage sovereign debt and how to make the most out of the little official development assistance that is available. And finally, let me say that we have other tools that are part of the strategy. For example, we have an ILO social protection social protection assessment tool, which tells us how much poverty and inequality reduction we have when we invest in social protection, and also how much GDP is created. And this is very important. We have applied this tool in Brazil and Senegal, and we are now applying it in Uzbekistan. We also have a social protection public finance management tool that was piloted in Paraguay, and we have requests to apply it in more countries. One thing that I would like to say before I conclude is that we must be cognizant that to have sustainable financing of social protection, we also need to create more and better jobs, especially for women and the youth. And this was clear from our speakers. And we also need a global financial architecture that empowers developing countries rather than that undermines their public finances. And the Sevilla outcome document is really the chart to move forward and to achieve this purpose. Thank you very much, Shahra. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Umberto. Thank you for sticking to time. And one thing that I wanted you to mention, and I know you were planning to mention, but you didn't, but it would be great now that I turn to Shay, because we have been working together, and you particularly have been working with Shay, in particular in terms of looking at the UN Framework Convention. So this gives me the occasion to say that I have the pleasure now to give the floor to Shay McClanahan, who is a technical specialist in social security at our sister agency, International Social Security Association, with whom we work very closely. Shay, I think Umberto didn't have time to start mentioning the importance of the UN Framework Convention on international tax cooperation. But Débora already said a lot about taxation and the importance of a conducive environment for resource mobilization through taxation, which all countries need to complement their social security contributions as a financing mechanism for their social protection systems. So I think this convention highlights important links between taxation and social protection, we hope. Could you explain why it's important to explicitly include the extension of social protection within the Sustainable Development Objectives of the Convention? I know this is something we're working on. And more importantly, how can international tax cooperation better address the challenges that countries are facing related to social security contributions, particularly in the context of cross-border workers, for example, such as remote workers, digital nomads, as they are referred to really be able to ensure adequate financing for social protection. And as with other speakers, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Shay.
Thanks, Shahra. Yes, 6 minutes is a challenge, but thanks for the opportunity to address this important topic. It's really fundamental to the work that we do at ISA on behalf of and together with our member institutions, which are now numbering around 340 globally. So I'm really happy to offer some reflections with that in mind. And as you said, in light of our collaboration with you in feeding into this UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation, where discussions are still ongoing at the global level. The Framework Convention, in emphasizing this point of the importance of domestic resource mobilization, really is essential. And I think especially at this critical historical juncture that we've talked about, where we're seeing ODA declining, where we're seeing countries seeking ways to reinforce those revenues to finance the key national development priorities that we've already heard about. And that, of course, includes at its core social protection. So at a high level, we believe that incorporating social protection more explicitly into this type of instrument is an opportunity to emphasize that substantive value of social protection in achieving those end objectives of tax cooperation, which is, of course, the framing of the framework, and specifically in the context of sustainable development. But as you said, it also highlights the need for better coordinated systems for domestic resource mobilization. And here, social security systems, contributory systems have historically played an outsized role. And we heard about that from the speakers previously. So on both of these issues, we've worked with your team to propose some amendments to the current text that would explicitly acknowledge these linkages. So maybe on the first topic of sustainable development, I think it's already been said by the previous speakers, but over the last at least 3 decades, we in the global social protection, international development communities have amassed libraries of evidence on the effectiveness of social protection in national development objectives. Expanding social protection is essential for poverty eradication, for reducing inequalities, supporting formalization, gender equality, and we've been hearing more recently, of course, about enabling just transitions. We also know that social protection is key to the strong economic returns and strengthening those domestic tax revenue bases. And both of these are really foundations of sustainable development that the framework is trying to ultimately achieve. So the proposed amendments there, which are under Article 4, if anyone wants to take a look at the actual inputs around sustainable development, to explicitly recognize this progressive extension target that's been mentioned of the 2 percentage points per annum, in line with international human rights and labor standards. So that includes floors. It also includes higher level benefits that might be financed through contributions. So it's really essential. It's a basic, but we think a necessary point. Second, on the issue of the fair allocation of taxing rights, and this would be Article 5 for those who are following those discussions, the current text is really calling for fair allocation of taxing rights and even renegotiation of tax agreements that have, in many places, codified unfair practices. So in that spirit, social contributions have historically been and still are a vital source of domestic financing for social protection. Globally, workers and employers' contributions to social insurance make up nearly a quarter of total government revenues, or about 8% of GDP. So really enormous contribution to the coffers that finance social protection. Unlike general taxation, however, Social Security contributions are dedicated resource pools. They're protected, from which we finance legally prescribed benefits, and that's primarily for contributing workers, although lines are blurring. And they're central reflections of the social contract that's been talked about, and this is in countries of all income levels. And of course, we recognize the historical challenges of extending contributory systems in contexts with high levels of informal employment, but the point stands. And as the world of work continues to evolve, continues to globalize, we're seeing more challenges with this portability of rights across borders. You mentioned digital nomads as a case in point. I think it's the one that puts most of these challenges in stark relief. Recently, more countries, the UN had counted 54 as of 2023, have introduced these digital nomad laws and visas, and there are lots of reasons for this, encouraging consumption, fostering innovation, et cetera, but the question of social security rights and obligations is often left to the side, getting overlooked, or even undermined actively. Some of the countries in the EU, we've noted Spain here on the panel, Italy, do require digital nomads to be affiliated with social security systems, but most of them, the vast majority, are really seeking to attract remote workers by reducing or eliminating their obligations for income tax or social security, maybe not asking, maybe even locking them out of local systems. So all sorts of really new barriers are cropping up. And from a worker's perspective, myopia has always been a problem, a challenge in social security systems. It's not surprising that this would be attractive, but it creates a lot of challenges. And also, I think the complexity of different systems in different places mean that even when workers try to affiliate and try to keep track of their different obligations, it's really, really difficult. So the framework in acknowledging the need to promote the adoption of double taxation agreements opens the door, I think, for a conversation about the need for better progress, faster progress on the negotiation of international social security agreements. Now, these are often highly specific, highly complex. They require dedicated frameworks to really ensure that portability. We track this at ISA. We know that there is progress, but it's not fast enough, and we still have large gaps, both in terms of the number of countries that have been pursuing these agreements, but also in terms of the kinds of risks that they cover. Many times they cover only long-term risks, leave out working age risks, et cetera. So they're creating all sorts of new risks for these kinds of workers that would want to take advantage. So this is why the ISA supports incorporating that perspective into the international or the Framework Convention text. In the final account, avoidance of Social Security contributions is comparable to unfair tax practices. So with that, over to you, Shahra, and I look forward to contributing to the discussion at the end.
Thank you so much, Shay. I think it was really good to hear your thoughts, not only on why Social Security contributions are so important to the financing of social protection systems. We know that from the data that we have, that they're a very important source of financing, but also why it's so important to bring those issues around social security contributions, particularly for workers who are mobile, who do work across countries, into a discussion around international tax cooperation and why, having these international social security agreements and their complexities, as important as it is, why it needs to be kind of, in a way, beefed up and supported through its recognition also in the International Tax Convention. So with that, I'm going to turn over now to our last panelist, last but certainly not least. I'm very, very delighted to have with us a very dear friend, Kate Donald, who is the head of Oxfam's International's Washington office, sitting in the Washington, D.C. Area. And so, Kate, you will not be surprised, given your physical proximity to the IFIs, that I'm going to be asking you and would be very interested to hear your thoughts on what you see as the key priorities for strengthening the collaboration that we need with international financial institutions. We mentioned what the Compromiso says about the importance of countries that have IMF programs continuing to protect expenditure on social protection. So really want to hear your thoughts about how we can support, how these institutions can better support the financing of social protection systems, but also investments in the care economy, which are pivotal for gender equality, as we know. You have 6 minutes, and I look forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Shahra. Very happy to be here alongside these expert speakers, and especially the distinguished government speakers who gave, I think, really excellent insights and very positive insights into action at the country level. So thank you for that. So as Shahra said, I work for Oxfam in Washington, D.C., where I lead our Confederation's engagement with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And I just wanted to take kind of 30 seconds at the beginning to set the scene, kind of why are the IFIs important in this conversation? Why do we care about the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund when talking about social protection? Well, of course, the IMF and the World Bank are hugely important in influencing and in some cases dictating and conditioning economic and social policies. They set the agenda for many countries around the world. Of course, this is especially so in low-income countries which have IMF loan programs. Where in many cases the IMF will condition their loans on certain policy actions, and the same happens to a certain extent with World Bank development policy financing. So they are really important in kind of setting the economic agenda globally. And then at the country level, working closely with ministries of finance and other ministries in kind of setting the financial environment in which these policies can be financed and implemented. So first, I want to take a moment to kind of recognize the positives. I do think it's really great to hear that the IMF is working closely with the ILO on this initiative. I think that kind of interagency collaboration is really vital. There has been some history in the past of the IFIs not necessarily recognizing the or properly appreciating the expertise of specialist UN agencies. So really happy that they are working closely with the ILO on this, and I really look forward to hearing more about the results and what improvements that can come out of this. Another positive on the IMF side is several years ago, the IMF did introduce the concept of social spending floors, which essentially are meant to guide IMF policymakers when they're setting conditions for loan programs. They're meant to set a floor at which social spending should not go below. Because we know that there has been a long history of IMF programs really pushing very harsh austerity, which has resulted in dramatic cuts in social spending, which have really had devastating impacts on the population, especially women and girls in many contexts. So the social spending floors is a really good step forward and a really good recognition from the IMF that austerity should not go too far. I'll say more in a minute about some of the limitations of those floors, but I do want to recognize that I do think it's an important and good step. On the World Bank side, we also do see some positive steps in terms of their recognition of the importance of social protection. They've recently set a target, a commitment to reach 500 million more people with social protection programs. Their new corporate scorecard, which measures the kind of success and impact of the institution, does include a measurement on beneficiaries of social safety net programs supported by World Bank operations. So there are also some positive moves in that direction. Also, both of the institutions have gender strategies, which do recognize the importance of social protection in protecting and fulfilling the rights of women and girls. So those are the positives. I'm now going to turn a little bit to the challenges and the areas where we really need to see improvement from the IFIs if we're going to make the decisive progress that we need on social protection. So universality is still a challenge. Both of the institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, still haven't really bought in to the idea, which I think is widespread in many other circles and among many other experts, that the ideal is to aim for universal social protection programs. And both institutions are still really pushing at the country level, in many cases, targeted social protection programs, despite some evidence that those programs have excluded some of those who most need it. So that pushing for a recognition of the importance of universality and pushing for them to work closely with countries to move towards universality is still a challenge that we're finding. Secondly, I said I would say more about the IMF social protection floors. So Oxfam, we did a study of the social spending floors, not social protection, the social spending floors a few years ago. And we did find a lot of challenges in their implementation. So first, we found they're kind of opaque and inconsistent. So what is included in the calculation of what the social spending floor is and should be really varies from country to country. In some cases, it includes public sector wage bills, and in other countries, it doesn't. So that was one problem. The other problem we found is that they're inadequate. Like the floors are not high enough. And in many cases, they don't even reach kind of other kind of globally agreed goals on health spending by the WHO, for example. And we also found that they're not really implemented. So in many cases, they became a ceiling rather than a floor. And in many cases, basically, the kind of push for austerity ended up taking precedence over the social spending floor. And I can put the link to that report in the chat in case anyone's more interested in reading more about that. And lastly, some of the other speakers have spoken about the financing and financing challenge. And this is an area where we also still really see the need to continue influencing the IFIs to be more ambitious and more creative, based on, lots of available evidence about how do we raise revenue to finance social protection. Our distinguished speaker from Brazil gave very encouraging and very positive examples of some measures that Brazil is taking, including offshore and wealth taxes. But we're not really seeing the IFIs move as decisively as we would want to kind of more progressive and ambitious tax policies and other revenue raising policies that would be able to better finance social protection. So this is still something that, although there has been rhetorical progress in both institutions in some support for progressive taxation, we haven't really seen that translate into kind of comprehensive into a kind of comprehensive platform of the recommendations that they're actually giving to countries and technical support to countries to implement progressive taxation programs. I'll stop there because I think my time is up, but I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Kate. Thank you for keeping to time and for giving us that very, I think, comprehensive take on some of the positives as well as some of the limitations in terms of what your research is suggesting. And I do encourage you to put the link to that report, which I think is a very interesting one, on the social spending floors of the IMF and what in practice is actually happening. I think that would be very useful for everyone to have access to. So now I'm just seeing we have quite a number of questions addressed to Willis. Mr. Chipango, obviously your presentation has raised many, many questions. And maybe I'll just pick up maybe one or two of the questions addressed to you about, asking about, apart from the rationalization of subsidies that you mentioned, the energy subsidies and some of the tweaks in taxation, are there any other tools that you are using to enhance fiscal discipline, to free more resources for further scaling up of social protection programs? I assume this is in the context of recurrent crises, including, the droughts, as well as many other elements that we are expecting to happen with the change in food prices and cost of living increasing and so forth. So maybe if you want to think about that question, and at the same time, maybe a question also, there was quite a bit of question about, and maybe I can address that to some of our colleagues on the from the ILO, as well as maybe ISA, in terms of how to be able, what are some good lessons in terms of expanding social security contributions, particularly, in the context of efforts also to reduce labor informality and increase formalization. Maybe that's something for some of you colleagues to think about. And I'm very conscious of time. Okay, and then something also about social protection, reducing inequalities. What can we say about that, about the extension of social protection coverage and its impact on inequalities? So these are some of the questions. I want to see if any of the panelists would like to respond to these questions. Can you just come in and respond, or put your hand up, and then I will have to be a bit more strict with time, giving you maybe 1 minute to respond to the questions. And then I want to really have some time to hand over to my colleague Helmut Schwarze to give us his closing remarks and reflections on the discussion. Any of the speakers? Yeah, Willis, please come in because you do have quite a few questions, but keep to your 2 minutes.
I'll keep within 1 minute. I hope I can. Yes. Thank you very much, Shahra. Very quickly, so which other measures did we undertake to ensure that we create fiscal space for, well, quite a good number. I think I talked about a little bit around domestic, but in addition to the removal of fuel subsidies, I also mentioned the fact that we had also done some restructure of the social protection programs. We are still existing up until 2020, 2021. And most of them were being done manually. So we had to ensure that we digitize most of those. And of course, we worked with the ministry responsible for social protection to sort of create a social register. And this helped a lot in terms of safeguarding some monies. But there's also one thing I thought I should mention, because you mentioned this in your introduction, that Zambia is one of the countries that defaulted on its debt. In fact, if memory serves, we were the first in Africa to default post-COVID. And that's because we had a very huge debt burden. So one of the other issues that we looked at was to embark on a debt restructuring program. And that has been going on quite okay. I think so far about 94% of our external debt has been restructured, and the restructuring exercise sort of gave us a little bit of fiscal room to deal with a lot of programs, especially social protection programs. Thank you.
Thank you. I also see that, Umberto, you have your hand up. Maybe you want to tackle the question on coverage and inequality?
Yes, and informality, yes. I would like to cover that. So basically,
maybe just you do the inequality one, and then I'll let someone else come in on informality.
Okay. Okay, so on inequality, we have developed a study that I was trying to present in my remarks, so that actually actually show the effect that investing in social protection has on reducing income inequalities, and the effects are huge, because if we model how much inequality is reduced in high income countries with the social protection system, it goes to 20, 25, 30% of the Gini coefficient is reduced by social protection benefit. This is huge, and this study can be applied in many developing countries to show the future impacts of potential reforms. So this is very important, and please do reach out, because we have the model and we can apply it in more and more countries. Thank you, Shahra. Over to you.
Great, Umberto. Thank you very much. I don't know, Shay, given Issa's perspective on informality and social security extension, do you want to come in on that question? I'm trying to divide some of the questions so everyone gets to pitch.
Sure, I'll have a go anyway. Obviously, I was emphasizing the tax framework convention in my remarks, and with that, the contributory side. But domestic resource mobilization is much bigger than that, obviously. It's always been, we talked about the social contract, but it's always been the way to lock in the social contract in explicit ways. And I think that the way that national systems are designed and delivered really has a huge bearing on the levels of trust in the systems. And that's what I would say to the issue of formalization, that I'm not going to point to one particular policy, but we heard Brazil talk about all of the different loopholes, all of the different discrepancies, all of the public transparency initiatives, et cetera. All of that is important because all of it creates trust in the system. Now, I think there's also a need for, and this is already happening globally, a focus on more integrated perspectives within national systems. This means developing more coherent systems, systems that comprise both tax financed and contributory components, but not in a disconnected way, in a connected way toward common goals. So really the focus being on how do you design systems that help and don't hurt right, that are contributing to the goal of formalization rather than undermining it. So in that vein, there's a focus on transitions, there's a focus on rather than graduation. So I put that in contrast to the old approaches that focused on graduation. Someday you're free of social protection, you're free of risk. That world, it really doesn't exist. And there's a recognition that really it's about transitions and how do we facilitate movement between schemes, portability within national context, coherence, as people's circumstances change in their life cycle, in their work lives. And this is supported obviously by policy changes, but it's also integrated, and we heard the word interoperable systems, management information systems, but also back office processes that the ISA is very much involved with in supporting governments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shay. I know that there'll be much more, I hope, more exchanges beyond the webinar, but I do want to keep the 5 minutes for my colleague Helmut Schwarze, who may also be able, and I encourage you, Helmut, if you want to pick up on any of the other questions. Helmut Schwarze is the head of our PFAX unit that does work on public finance, actuarial, and statistics for the department, and and has a very distinguished career, including in Brazil. But I won't do that, as I haven't done the same for other speakers. So I will just hand over to Helmut and ask him to give us his closing remarks. Over to you, Helmut.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shahra, and indeed. It was an extremely rich webinar with 3 really very clear country examples that show that one of the key questions that we have posed, what about financing social protection in the current context, that it is feasible to extend a fiscal space, that it is possible, even in a constrained context, have a political commitment and have a clear strategy to develop the space, the sources for complying with a rights-based social protection system. I could highlight many examples from what our speaker said. Of course, I'm particularly close to Brazil because of my previous career in Brazil, but I'm really impressed about the many examples in terms of looking for more progressivity of the tax system that have been shown. Also, the case of Spain with a very clear coherence throughout international financial and social protection policies is something that is really remarkable. And what should we say about the example of Zambia? Zambia has worked closely with the ILO. One of the cases that Willis mentioned, we contribute or we collaborate with NEMA on the extension of coverage of social health protection in Zambia, and the spirit of building a technical evidence-based policy and with a clear horizon of extending social protection step by step, and also formalizing the labor market wherever possible. So this is my first takeaway. Financing social protection is possible. My second takeaway here is that domestic resource mobilization has been mentioned by all of the participants in one way or the other. It is central. It is the result of a policy choice. We have had examples of how progressive taxation, making taxation more progressive, can help expanding fiscal space. We have also seen how the reforms can help improving compliance with social contributions, and particularly there are some questions here in the chat on the role of social contributions. We here at the ILO, we defend social contributions. A number has been mentioned by one of the participants, the percentage, the proportion that that social contributions represent. It is impossible to find a tax reform that replaces social contributions by a tax. So social contributions are a backbone of financing social protection, must be, even in the case of low and middle income countries. So this is a second takeaway. Among domestic resource mobilization, just I also took note here of several cases examples where public spending was reallocated in a virtuous way. Then my third takeaway is that the countries, the domestic efforts are really key in an environment where you have a shrinking possibility of accessing ODA. But the domestic efforts, they need to be supported by an enabling international environment. And we have heard in many presentations about the importance of a better aligned international financing, of stronger cooperation on taxation. I mean also the tax framework, the UN tax framework is very important because it quotes the importance of financing social protection. Just having the expression social protection in the final document would be very important, because it will remind in 10, 15, 20 years people who are responsible for collecting taxes that collecting taxes for social protection is very important. So I think that I end this participation at this webinar with a positive feeling that it is really possible to work heavy and to comply with a coverage extension goal of 2 percentage points per year, which has been agreed in Seville 1 year ago. It is not just an aspiration. I mean, many countries, 43 countries, if I remember correctly, Umberto, have had such a performance over the last years between 2015 and 2023, so in the first half of the SDG period. So it is possible to accelerate the progress towards universal social protection by means of such a practical benchmark, setting a policy and financing goal on the horizon as a reference to incentivize us to work and to transform the commitments into reality by means of reforms, stronger institutions, and more collaboration among governments, social partners, and international organizations. Thank you very much. Back to you, Shahra.
Thank you very much, Helmut. Great wrapping up of the discussion with the emphasis on domestic resource mobilization, social security contributions being the backbone, really earmarked taxes for social protection that are very important to maintain, and the importance of having an enabling and coherent global framework. So coherence with UN Tax Convention, very important, but also with the international financial institutions. So social spending floors should speak to the social protection floors. Very important key points. So with this, let me thank Ambassador Díaz, Mr. Willis Chipango, Débora Freire Cardoso, Shay McClanahan, Kate Donald, Umberto Cataneo, and my dear colleague Helmut Schwarzer for their contributions, and my dear colleague who had to leave, Valerie Schmitt, who was here in the beginning of our sessions. And thank you, all of you, for listening, for putting your questions in the chat, and we look forward to having more conversations beyond this webinar with you on this very important topic of financing of social protection systems. Wishing you a very good rest of day, evening, and until the next time. Thank you.